Welcome to Artificiality, the podcast by Helen and Dave Edwards from Sonder Studio. We created Sonder Studio to empower humans in our complex age of machines and data. Our research-based, design-oriented consulting and education services help you and your organization work better with machines and data. You can learn more about us at getsonder.com. The world has been upended by the introduction of generative AI. We think this could be the largest advance in technology ever. All of our clients are trying to figure out what to do, how to de-risk the introduction of these technologies, and how to design new, innovative solutions. To get a perspective on these changes created by AI, we talked with Lukas Egger, who leads the Innovation Office and Strategic Projects team at SAP Signavio, where he focuses on de-risking new product ideas and establishing best-in-class product discovery practices. With a successful track record in team building and managing challenging projects, Lukas has expertise in data-driven technology, cloud-native development, and has created and implemented new product discovery methodologies. Excelling at bridging the gap between technical and business teams, he has worked in AI, operations, and product management in fast-growth environments. Lukas has movie credits for his work in computer graphics research, published a book on philosophy, and is passionate about the intersection of technology and people, regularly speaking on how to improve organizations. We love Lukas's concept that we are in the peacock phase of generative AI, when everyone is trying to show off their colorful feathers and not yet showing off new value creation. We enjoy talking with Lukas about his views on the realities of today and his forecasts and speculations on the future. Lukas, thanks so much for joining us today. We're really excited to talk with you.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited.
Let's start with what's going on. What's so different? You've written a whole series of posts on LinkedIn about large language models. Perhaps you can just give us a bit of your sort of most up-to-date thoughts of how this technology is changing the world around us.
Yeah. So first, I would say whatever I'm about to say, most likely in 6 months from now, I will have been proven wrong, right? So that's what it feels today.
I feel like that's aggressive to say 6 months. I'd say 6 weeks, but go ahead. That's okay. That's good. Good confidence. I like that.
Absolutely. So the disclosure about that. Writing about LLMs for me was more of an exercise because normally in my job, so I lead an innovation office and we try to de-risk new ideas. Normally, I feel like I have a grasp on things in a way. We have methodologies, we look at desirability, feasibility, viability, agreeability, and we have a whole slew of methodologies, artifacts, and little ways how to reduce the risk and make sense of what's happening. With large language models in the last couple of months, what really happened was that this kind of equation got upended. What do I mean by that? So first of all, there was quite the difference in terms of the technology because there was some weird overhanging capability. Normally, we already know we would love to do this. The customer wants that. And we have a strategically aligned set of ideas that we want to pursue. And all of a sudden, from left field came capabilities, and we didn't really understand how to make sense of them. Then the next thing that happened was that it was way qualitatively different than what we thought would happen, right? So a couple of years ago, everybody was betting on automation of manual labor or rote and boring tasks. Now we live in a world where the most creative work is the one that seems to be in danger of having the biggest disruption. So writing about large language models for me has been a way of trying to make sense. And I guess I'm not alone in that because even people who do nothing else but working with these kind of models feel like that the relentless acceleration of the pace has been bigger or more pronounced than what they have experienced before. I do have a theory, if we want to go into that, like one of the explanations is that obviously there's always reinforcing feedback loops, right? If you see there's like a gravitational well of value that can, pull you in. But in addition, one thing that I think has dramatically changed 5 or 10 years ago, the field where I worked in AI or machine learning, data science, what we called it back then in the old days, right, was vision, was NLP, were different fields. And now we have seen that a lot of all of these endeavors have collapsed into some form of language representation. And whether it's coding, whether it's generating pictures, there seems to be a unified language that really connects those fields. And now all of the interesting ideas and the little advancements come together under the umbrella of large language models, in a sense, together with the normal acceleration of hardware and all the other facts. It feels like we're having an over exponential, like not just a simple exponential, but multiple time stacked exponential situation right now. But since I'm talking so much, you can infer that I haven't figured it out, because as the adage goes, I'm sorry it was taking so long. I just hadn't had enough time.
One of the things that always strikes me about this particular moment in time is that there are so many things coming together at once. And I was wondering if you have some sort of first principles that you end up going back to as you wrote the blogs, as you think about this. First principles around, say everything from kind of the importance of efficient compute to the fact that, as you referred to, these multimodal models are changing the way that we think about the way the intelligence gets put together and how it gets put back at us, about first principles about how humans interact with technology. How have you thought about some of those sort of grounding principles?
Mm-hmm. Thank you for the question. Super interesting question to ask, not like what's happening, but how do we make sense and what is the structured approach? I have to put in a little bit of hindsight bias, right? And pretend that I knew those things when in reality I didn't. I was largely motivated by curiosity. And I felt like, there's things that where the entropy of the information was greater than I expected it, right? So there was like, wow, this is interesting. I hadn't thought about it. And then I tried to incorporate it. And I will give examples. But I do want to jump forward a little bit, because right now there's 2 phases. We started with it, and now what I call the peacock phase. Every company is rallying and trying to show that they're capable of executing on this vision, and they try to operationalize this technology as quickly as possible. Get this technology in. Let's connect an API. Let's see where the low-hanging fruits are. And I think that's fair, because already that is some sort of fitness function, and it shows the prowess in terms of executional capabilities of a company. Fair. But I think what was more interesting to me is the second order effects. So that's where the first principle ideas come into play that you were alluding to. And as a first approximation of tackling the problem, what we are doing, what I'm doing in my job, thinking about innovation and our strategy, is to think about where are currently the value flows and the jobs to be done. Like, what are really the jobs that we do for our customers? Because most companies are not selling what they think they're providing in terms of value, right? That's, for most companies, I would argue that's true. So we're trying to better understand the reality of the holistic value generation that we can provide, and then juxtapose it with the strategic modes that we believe will end up being in place after we have adopted some of the technology. Now, this sounds all a bit aloof, but let me give you like 2 or 3 ideas how to work into that. So one of the things that I believe, is that the content creation cost will converge towards marginal or zero costs. I'm not saying that content will be without value. I'm just saying that the creation of content will get cheaper. Now, what does that imply? It implies that probably if there is so much more content, that some sort of assurance or trust in the right content will be much more expensive or more valuable. So we're then thinking about, okay, if creation gets cheap, but trust becomes more expensive or more valuable, what of our value flow or how we provide value, what can be defensible, right? As a competitive, innovative advantage that's not easily disrupted, and we try to work through the problem in that way. So that's, let's say, the business perspective. If I have my glasses like, okay, corporate strategy, how do we tackle it? On the personal level, the things that I try to approach is I try to find similar ideas in the past to give me a reference frame. And then, because the intuitions are very off, right? I'm not trusting my own intuitions when somebody says like, hey, we have something smart. But I can look back and I can go like, hey, was it a good time to be an author before or after the printing press? Now, there's a little bit of a misnomer, because the job of an author, came to being much later. But what I'm trying to say is, were more people engaged in creating books and narratives after the printing press was invented than before. So I'm trying to come up with analogies that help guide me on the personal level to make better sense. And then the third pillar is what really piques my interest. And for instance, one of the things that piques my interest is that I believe that AI and large language models will change our perception of products and will create a relationship between consumers and a product that is highly overloaded on the emotional plane, right? It will feel like a relationship and less of a product. So everything that for 50 years brands have been trying to do, overload their brand perception with emotions, will now come not only full circle, but in full force, right? And you will feel like, I'm not just using a different browser. Like I was cut off from my relationship in a sense. So first principle thinking with value flows. There is analogies to make sense. And then thirdly, there is the things that I feel like, wow, they're substantially different. And my curiosity should lead the way and thinking about it.
Is that because we're going to start, the language interface is going to prompt us to anthropomorphize products that we wouldn't have before? Is that what you mean?
I think that is one of the parts, but I think it goes deeper than that. I think there is, there's this uncanny valley. There is this tendency, if something tries to be naturalistic or let's say look like a face, if it's a mere abstraction, we see oh, look at the car, it has a nice smile or whatever, right? And it makes sense to us intuitively to talk about it that way. Now, if we create, let's say, the image of a face, if it's perfect, we really like it. But if it's just not perfect, it feels like this uncanny valley where we feel alienated and we don't like it. You could say now, hey, everybody will have an interaction and we want to have this relationship. What I'm trying to say is we are primed, our operating system, our brains, our emotions. We want to connect. So if a product is capable of reacting on an emotional level, it will happen automatically because we are in a way programmed to seek out emotional bonds for various reasons. I'm not a psychologist or, evolutionary. I can't give you all the research, but it seems like we're really built up to that. And now here comes the second part that is important to me, and which you probably alluded in your question, is if you have something where people have already a tendency, it's very, very easy. I don't want to say exploit, but it's very easy to capitalize on it. Right now, if you have a customer that loves your product, that is really a raging fan, that's the best for your business, right? Word of mouth, everything else. So as soon as products are more capable of creating an emotional bond, every company would want to position their products with that feature because it creates more loyal customers and a better offering from their perspective, right? So I think we want it, and the companies will just then double down on it.
I think it's interesting. It's some number of years ago, I'm trying to remember when it was, we posed the question of when will a voice AI have voice? sort of using the second use of voice, like you talk about the voice of a poet or the voice of a writer. When will it have its own voice? And we're close to that. You can ask these LLMs to absorb a persona and be able to talk. So anything from you're a happy customer service agent to a friend of ours did a whole series with ChatGPT, and it said, give me every response like a tech bro. And so ChatGPT said, yeah, bro. And that was all it did for a while. And I've worked on trying to adopt voices as well, but it's so I've respond back in the voice of Apple and Chiat Day, which was the all the iconic advertisements was always a collaboration between Apple and Chiat Day for a very long time. But it's still mimicking, right? So you could ask it to respond in the voice of SAP, and it will look at all the language that SAP's ever generated and try to respond to it. What's interesting, and I wonder when this will happen, and not an if, because I assume someone will be, is how you can create a unique new voice, right? When can you actually craft a new voice that is not just adopting, what it's learned from scouring the internet in the past, but actually create a new idea, a new persona, a new thing, a new voice for a brand? I think all of that gets to kind of your point, though, which is that, at least as I hear it, is we're going to have these systems that do speak like the organizations that we work for, and so you will have this sort of conversation, which is not so stilted, but it actually starts to feel like an expression of the brand. And that's a fascinating journey. I think we're at the beginning of it because it's going to take a while to really be good at it. But I think it's a really fascinating thing to think about in terms of the future of innovation.
Not only that, I think I can give even a couple of pointers why it makes sense for a company to do it. Whether it's something we want, I want to put a disclaimer out there. I'm not advocating for any of those things. My job is to understand what are the contingent possibilities that we're dealing with, right? If you have a product that says, I can decrease your order to cash process by X seconds, you can put a very precise number on it, and your ROI will be hard capped by that number. It's a very straightforward engagement. If you have, through whether it's an AI or any kind of proxy, a relationship with your customer that is overloaded with emotion, like this interface is the one that I want to call and talk to, like 3 a.m. in the morning on a Sunday when something happened and the process broke down or something bad is happening. This is the one voice I trust. My pricing is not like bound by the 5 seconds on a medium cost basis per unit economics, whatever. The cost is all of a sudden, how much do you care about the ease of emotions or the ease of pain when you're in dire needs? And so I believe there is very, very strong incentives to create a relational based economic if you have tools that are capable of doing it.
That's a very interesting perspective. I like that. So essentially the ROI of creating some sort of interaction is not based on sort of pure task and efficiency. What you're saying is that the emotional connection that can be created can elevate that value because you're actually creating a connection with your customer in a way that is much more valuable. As you would think of having how much more customers will pay for a fantastic field systems engineer, right? The one who really understands the problem, who can really come and actually give everybody comfort. There's a high value in that personal interaction as well.
So I think once again, like we talked about 3 ways of making sense. And the second one was to come up with ideas from the past that can guide you, right? Like there was painters and paintings, and then in the 19th century, photography came along. And in the beginning, the photography was just an imitation of what painters used to do. But very quickly, because the craftsmanship, the work, and the cost of, let's say, a painting got much cheaper, like it changed. So the value was less about the craft and the scene and became more about the narrative. Like how can it evoke emotion or these kind of things. I'm pretty sure that for the next, let's say, I don't know, 1, 2, 3, 5 years, we'll be stuck in this imitation phase. So I call it the peacock phase, just get it in. The next phase maybe is an imitation phase where we had automation and prediction capabilities. They're now on steroids, so we want to do more of it. So we'll have like all of the quote unquote normal optimization stuff. But since this technology is capable of more, I would wager that there is then a long tail which will double down on the capabilities, and it will not end in this imitation. So let's get better optimization. How can we offset tasks? How we can do this cheaper? It will then find ways of capitalizing or making good on the new capabilities, which I believe, for instance, not exclusively, but for instance, are about, let's say, the emotional side of services and trust. That was just one example, but yeah.
You talk about your innovation office as having a primary role in de-risking, or at least that's one of the key focuses. How do you think about approaching LLMs from a de-risking perspective? Think about, for instance, things like alignment. How do you think about de-risking that the LLM you're going to use is going to be out of alignment with your organization?
Yeah, wow. To be honest, that's still too far out. Right now, most of my work with large language models is de-risking on, let's say, on a basis level, right? Which is really desirability, feasibility, not even viability, and not even agreeability. I would say we're still, so desirability, trying to make the step from the mere get this like chat interface in and show that we can adopt it in our API suite and put it in front of the user, to elevate it to something like, what is actually the biggest win for a user and how can we make use of this technology, not just, plug it in, right? Feasibility, there are so many components which are not similar to the ones we dealt before, whether it's RLHF or others or retraining, or there's so many new parts to this technology that just on how can we keep the technology in check, that's already a lot to do. And then I don't even want to start the Pandora box. Like I'm not even peeking in going like GDPR, PII, rights, and all of that stuff. We're in for a wild ride. So I'm maybe not there yet. So I cannot really talk a lot about how we would do it on a practical level from a business perspective, because baby steps. And I would say that most companies out there who claim that they already have figured it out don't know what they're talking about or doing it very poorly, right? Now, what you talked about alignment, there is inner and outer alignment. The outer alignment does the thing what we want it to do, and I don't struggle so much there. I believe we'll have rather quick wins, or we will have ideas on how to check outer alignment. The inner alignment, namely, is what an agent that we create actually incentivized to not pretend, but to really want what we wanted to do and what a play pretends to provide. Wow, there it gets A, philosophical, and B, really, really tricky. I do think the current specter of, this will all go terribly bad, is a natural reaction because it feels so alien and we feel threatened on a very down to the core of our philosophy and identity as humans. But I also have to say this is research in progress and it's not easy. It's a wicked problem, right? It's not just complicated or hard, it's a wicked problem.
When you talk about the emotional side of the interactions with customers and places to sort of advance that quickly, there's sort of obvious use cases in terms of which are more of the peacock ones that you mentioned, getting a chat stood up and seeing really how it's different than a previous chat. And the question that pops into my mind is, how will this amplify or change or make obsolete some of the metrics that matter when it comes to figuring out how to go forward with customers? Are we going to see really big changes in the way that we would look at, say, sentiment analysis or some of the standard metrics around customer engagement, because we get so much more context? Or is this more evolutionary as we sort of figure out how customers respond? I mean, it's probably both, but be interested in your thoughts on how we think about the kind of tangible metrics of customer engagement.
I cannot give an easy answer, but I have at least like two ideas that can help us provide or gain an intuition. So the first thing is, I think it's a gradual slope of value, like how the accrual of value works. What do I mean by that? If you want to put out a self-driving car, which is in a world where, like, if it breaks down or does something unexpected, it is really, really painful or casualty, or the downside is unproportional, then the entire value is locked up in the Six Sigma part. So starting at 99.99999% accuracy or performance. With our technology, in a sense, like this that we're talking about today, large language models, already we see value adds every step on the way. So I think we have a smooth transition curve, and there will be applications. We don't have to wait for a revolution in like customer engagement or how that works, and it takes us 3 years. I think from now on, every week, every day, there will be like little increments. So that's the one part. Now, the second part is, I do think that in terms of adoption of new technologies, there is certain truths. We first want to be in artistic control. First, elevators used to be operated by people who worked levers, welcomed people. But it was not because the technology wouldn't have supported an automatic, like push a button or whatever and ride experience, but because it was so new that people who created the elevators wanted the consumers to feel safe and to learn the experience, okay? Now, these days, there is like this, I'm not sure how they're called, port and hub elevators, where you don't push a button in the elevator, but rather you push a button up front and it directs you. So we went from somebody is in full control to we're in control to we abdicate control, but the outcome is better because the elevator ride is nicer, even if you don't have buttons in there any longer. So how does that relate now to your question? I cannot really predict like all of the steps, but I think it will go through those phases. Why? Because there's incremental value add already. And I think it will go through first being in control, then some sort of artistic control, guided experience, then getting away and, abdicating or pushing over more and more responsibility. Now, why is a large language model even capable or interesting in this thing? Or in this use case, because it can act as the super glue or connector between different domains. So whether it's an API or a different system, some sort of language, whether it's an API language, English, natural language, or something in between, a process language, it will understand it. So it can jump seamlessly and relate between those domains. And I didn't really provide an answer, but I feel like I see where it is going, right? And I would bet on this happening and changing.
Well, I do like that analogy. I mean, I think about, it's a simple analogy, the elevator one, but maybe it's because I'm old enough to remember a few elevators where there were still people operating.
I once lived in a building, yes, with actual operators.
Yeah. And there's no question that there are no elevator operators around anymore. But that next step, I think that's actually the interesting one, is, okay, so let's just assume that at the moment the elevator operators are so-called prompt engineers. And, in a year from now, there'll be buttons. But then in how many years from now will it be like the elevators where it's not about a single elevator going up and down according to the users in the elevator. It's actually about optimizing the system of elevators and having the system of elevators, which is more like a sharing version of an LLM in my mind. I'm thinking how, because to like I love ChatGPT. I mean, it's just so incredibly helpful, as are many of the other large language models that you can access in various ways. But it's only a one-on-one interaction. It's not it doesn't help me resolve an argument with Dave. It's not connected into him. It's like this sharing, this collective intelligence that we could develop with a bit of help from the smarts in these things is a really interesting way of thinking about that sort of 3 iterations of where these things might go, to more of a collective intelligence, collective decision making. Because we know that the strength of humans and also the hard things is our social brains, is our social resolution, our social imagination, social creativity. And I think about that, and it's nice to have that analogy of the different ways of the elevators emerging.
Just to add on to this, like 2 things I want to maybe throw in to just compound on what you just said, Helen. So first, I often try to say or think about what will not change, right? We're very obsessed about what are the things that will change. Things that will never change is people want stuff faster, cheaper, and easier. So there is an appetite to reduce complexity for the person, like for the human, for the consumer. So if there's an ability of this technology to simplify our interaction with whatever we want to achieve, it will gravitate towards it. It will take multiple steps. There's a lot of ways of getting there, right? There's more examples like skeuomorphism and these kind of things, but we'll get there. And the other thing about this change is that also I believe that it's more engineering challenges. Like when you, for instance, said about like our social interactions, I think having a system that can help you emphasize and talk to another person is a capability that's not explored, but already in the system.
There's another part of that last stage when you're talking about the elevators, just to keep running with that, which is about, the first step, you're right, you're counting on a person actually to get the task done. The second is you're sort of making your own choice of which elevator to get into. So I have my own sort of autonomy or agency of choosing which elevator is going to get me where I want to go, what the floor I want to get to quickly enough. And then the last one is I'm being told where to go, which elevator to use. And you can parallel that with, say, travel. We used to have to call a travel agent who would then go and arrange everything for us. And then we could call the airlines directly and make plane reservations. And eventually got to things like Kayak and Expedia that will tell us which one is most efficient for us, right? It's sort of in that same pathway. And what's interesting is I do wonder when we'll have some ability for some interim system to help us navigate which LLM to use and other things like that. Like you can start with, well, I'm going to, I've done some comparisons of saying, okay, I'm going to try this prompt and this task in ChatGPT, and now I'm comparing it against Open Assistant, the new open source system that's come out of Berlin, right? And so I can go back and forth among all of these systems, but when do I have some assistant help like the centralized elevator system that says, I want to get this task done, and something says, aha, you're now going to take LLM, otherwise known as, elevator 11, and that's the way you're going to go, because that's going to be your best task. And there's a fascinating potential evolution, because all of these LLMs are different, and we don't know yet what their comparative and relative strengths are, but that will emerge over time. I think that there will be some value of using one or the other, but that's a long way off.
Oh, it's a really good point to steer the conversation. But once again, I don't proclaim to know the future, but I would again give like an example. I don't know the current clock speed of my computer. I have no idea. If you'd asked me 20 years ago, I could have told you exactly how many megahertz my computer had, because it was such a big thing. And I was so proud when I had my first Pentium 100 or whatever, right? These days, we don't care about it because there was a regression to the mean as, the potential alpha or difference between providers just leveled or plateaued off, like all of, let's say, the perceived value got shifted away from the raw, let's say, power, because that just narrowed out, towards the user interface and the experience. That's why we're also now in an experience economy. And I do believe that will happen here again. For the next couple of years, there will be differences in terms of like, oh, if you want the picture, use Midjourney. It's much better than, or whatever, plug in X, right? I'm not trying to endorse anything here. But I do believe that as soon as we hit like the first, let's say, tapering off of technological advancement, like we will not care, right? We also these days, do we really care about horsepowers? Maybe like 3 to 5% of the people who buy a car really think like horsepower, that's the thing I want to look at. But most people care about safety, convenience, cost, mileage, right? These things. And I think that's the way to go with LLMs as well. It will be very like the same analogy.
Yeah, we'll get more sophisticated comparisons based on how the LLMs exist within the system, right? I love how you bring up the megahertz, because I was at Apple during the whole era of the megahertz myth. It was the whole thing. The push of the keynote was to get out there and say megahertz didn't matter, because that was the Intel story, because there was so much else happening inside the Macintosh that was so important to driving performance, right? So,
wonderfully put.
I'm personally have been using Midjourney a lot. That's what our presentations where you can have a wonderful experience of just flipping through and seeing all the images that we like grabbing out of Midjourney. But would that change once Stable Diffusion is accelerated on the chip inside our Mac and our iPhone? Well, from a performance perspective, it probably would. And if we're designing an app for a client, that's probably where you're going to want to go, because that's what's at the chip level. That kind of integration we haven't really seen yet. We've started describing it a little bit as the AIOS, as these foundation models start to come together, and they operate like an AIOS between the application developer and the world's data and the hardware, the chips beneath it. But it's still so early, we don't know what that's going to look like yet.
I want to stress the point that you just said, because I think it's very erudite. Like, we are very early. If you think about GPT-4, for all intents and purposes, it's quarantined. It doesn't even have connection to the internet, right? Now, let me rattle off some obvious things that we want from LLMs that currently are still in the making, like persistent memory, like an agent system, plugins, like multimodality. All these things I would consider engineering challenges. I'm not trying to take away from how hard it is to actually implement and create it. I'm just saying we have a playbook and people will work on it. We don't need like a messianic figure to bring us new technology to get to the next stage, right? So all of the things we're talking about the future and we're excited about it. And we essentially are still with the quarantined version 0.1, right? And we can already see the next 20 steps. And I would be shocked, absolutely shocked, if there's not tons of emergent behavior as we add single capabilities. I believe just putting in plugins and memory and maybe 2 more things, not even changing this technology, will create an effect where we go like, whoa, this feels completely different.
If I could maybe finish with one more question, sort of tapping your role in innovation and, as you say, de-risking, which I do love, by the way. If you had, a CEO or a group of CEOs from other companies, not trying to, sort of pick into your role at SAP, but if a group came to you and asked for advice about how to think about this technology change that we're going through, how would you advise them? How would you help them think through how to innovate, but also how to manage risk at the same time?
That's a really tough question. Okay, I will try my best. I would say essentially a lot of the things that you mentioned throughout this conversation. And I would maybe, first of all, I would take away a little bit of the pressure. Like there's this analogy from Alice in Wonderland, where she meets the Red Queen and they're running. And yet they don't seem to be moving any step forward. And Alice starts talking to the Red Queen. It's like, we're running as fast as we can. We're not moving. And she says, well, you're in my land. Here it's very different. You have to run doubly as fast to just get anywhere. And I believe that's the felt experience of executive level personnel with digitalization and now large language models. And I would first say, look, just because there is such a frenzy doesn't mean that we're right now deciding the future of your company. Because what we see is like the first wave. What capsizes a boat is never the first wave. It's the second or third, right? Okay, so take off a little bit of the emotional pressure and feeling like you're already too late or nothing can be done. The next thing is acknowledge that there are stages to it, whether it's peacock or imitation, whatever you want to call it, right? Then be really clear on what is your right to win and what is the core value proposition that you can defend or that you want to enable. And that takes time and smarts, and it takes the knowledge and experience of those seasoned executives. You cannot just log on to Twitter and say like, okay, I'm reading now about Twitter and I'm an expert on LLMs and everything will be perfect. No, you have to do the work. You have to go like, what are our top 10 assumptions? Whether it's like, for instance, this content creation cost convergence towards zero or whatnot. Look at the value streams, look at the strategy, and really come up with a thought-through, comprehensive understanding. What are the things you want to do and not want to do? And then start small and start to gain the experience that enables you to take opportunities. So first, lessen the felt like anxiety, angst, and like this feeling of if we're not doing it, we're already doomed. Second, don't fall into the imitation game or peacocking, whatever you want to call it, but really come up with something that is your own, that is our strategy for this disruption. And nobody else could have written it and nobody else can execute it. Because one thing is absolutely sure, this is an overhang of capabilities, i.e. it will create more opportunity to create value. So in a sense, I would argue it's not a threat, it's an opportunity because you already have the relationship to clients, you already have domain understanding, you have now way more capability to create even more value. It's an opportunity. And I think if you go through those steps and reframe it, I think then it should be something that excites you, where you're not like, oh my God, I have to do this and this is horrible, but rather like, wow, like I'm winning. This is amazing. I want to do this. And I think if you can start a project with that feeling, I want to do it, and we're all excited, that's the best you can start with, because there is no assurances for success. There never are. But that's what I would recommend everyone to do. And once again, I danced my way around an answer, but honestly, that is the most honest answer I can provide at this moment in time.
I think that's great. I think it's a great answer. It's great advice. I think it's been fantastic conversation. Thank you so much for joining us. We look forward to checking in again in 6 months and seeing how accurate your forecast has been. Exactly. So we're going to write them all down, and we're going to no, but seriously, thank you so much. It's been great fun. This is a huge transition, and everything's moving so quickly that it's really wonderful to be able to take a bit of a step back and think about it at a broader perspective. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, and also to be such a important, interesting voice to talk about it, because most media out there has a very singular view, and I really enjoyed that you're covering more bases on such a high level. It is really a testimony to your work, and I'm very happy to be part of it. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoy our podcast, please subscribe on Substack or your favorite podcast platform. And please leave a positive rating or comment. Sharing your positive feedback helps us reach more people and connect them with the world's great minds. Seriously, a review on Apple Podcasts is a big deal. And if you like how we think, then contact us about our speaking and workshops and human-centered product design. You can learn more about us at getsonder.com, and you can contact us at hello@getsonder.com. You can learn more about making better decisions in our book, Make Better Decisions, How to Improve Your Decision-Making in the Digital Age. The book is an essential guide to practicing the cognitive skills needed for making better decisions in the age of data, algorithms, and AI. Please check it out at mbd.zone, on Amazon, bookshop.org, or place an order through your favorite local bookstore.
Solid state.